New York Times recently published, and I quote, "A plunge in oil prices has sent tremors through global and political economic order." So the question that I propose to you today, and ask that you would consider through the duration of the speech, is this: are falling oil prices good or bad for our economy? During this speech, I will present you with the pros and cons of falling oil prices both nationally and globally. I have researched and gained insights from sources such as New York Times, Forbes Magazine, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, and USA Today. I have also looked at more locally accredited sources such as the Houston Chronicle and Dallas Times. Now, in my speech, I will be focusing on two main points. The first one being, what effect has falling oil prices had on the United States? And secondly, what effect has falling oil prices had globally? Now, on my first point, I want us to talk about the pros and cons of falling oil prices within the United States. I want to share with you an experience that happened to me recently that I think many of you listening can relate to. About 2 months ago, I was at the gas station filling up my car, which was on empty, and I noticed that the pump shut off at just a little over half of what it usually took to fill my car up. Now, I immediately thought that the gas pump had shut off prematurely, and so I started it again, only to realize that it shortly was going to shut off. Now, many Americans would consider this as a pro, being that they are now spending less money at the gas pump than usual. In fact, Forbes magazine recently stated that the average American household is expected to save $750 on gasoline this year than that of last year. Now, not only does it look promising for the average American, but local businesses see promise in this too. Local businesses such as restaurants, retail stores, car dealerships, movie theaters, etc. Because now Americans have more money in their pockets to spend on these luxuries. However, on the flip side, let's look at the cons of falling oil prices. The Houston Chronicle just published that Halliburton, which is an American multinational corporation and one of the world's largest oilfield service companies, is laying off 1,000 employees and is only expected to see that number rise. Now, with those statistics staring us in the face, it's easy for us to see the harsh reality that many Americans are facing, and that is the fear of losing their job. Now, I want to briefly give you a list of the top oil-producing states within the United States so that I can give you a better perspective of the number of people this is affecting. These states are as following, in no particular order: Pennsylvania, Kansas, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Montana, Utah, Wyoming, Alaska, and California. Now, I know we talked earlier about this being beneficial to local businesses. However, local businesses within high oil producing states might see this as a negative. Being that many Americans in these states are about to be laid off, they will no longer have the extra money to spend at these businesses. So now it's time for you to decide which side of the scale you're on. Do you believe that falling oil prices are not really affecting the American economy? Or do you believe that the American economy is taking a huge hit because of the fall of oil prices? Now I want us to jump into my second point, being what effect has falling oil prices had globally? Real quick, I want to give you the list of the top 5 oil-producing countries in our world. They are as followed, respectively: Russia, Saudi Arabia, United States, Iran, and China. Now, we've already talked about the cons and pros of falling oil prices in the United States. So let's shift our focus to the only other 2 countries that are really seeing pros from falling oil prices. Saudi Arabia right now is at a time economically where they can produce oil at a very low cost. So therefore, they are making a huge amount of money on exports to other countries who haven't been able to produce their own oil. China has a record of being very financially stable and taking care of their own, and so at this point in time, China is able to produce their own oil and really hasn't been affected by this. However, where China is affected is that their government has a long record of lending money to other countries, such as Venezuela, who has recently been hit very hard by the fall of oil prices, and now Venezuela is looking at the fear of defaulting on their loans to China. So therefore, China has to deal with the possibility that countries are not going to be able to pay them back the money they owe them until oil prices are back where they used to be. Now, according to Washington Times, the biggest casualty so far has been our #1 oil-producing country, which is Russia. Now, considering that half of the government's money in Russia comes from energy revenue, the government is forced with the possibility of having to very soon make huge budget cuts in order to make up the difference. And they won't be able to see these budget cuts go away until the price of oil rises. Now, some politicians believe that inflation is good for our economy. They don't see any consequences, long-term consequences, of the fall of oil prices. However, some politicians will tell you that the fall of oil prices might very well be sending some countries into recession. So the purpose for my speech was to hopefully keep my bias out and allow you to become more informed of this subject. I hope that you now have a better understanding of what is happening in our country and globally with falling oil prices, and you're better able to understand the question that was proposed at the beginning of the speech. And that is, what do you think the effect is of falling oil prices, both nationally and globally? Is it good or is it bad? And now it's time for you to decide. Thank you for listening.